So just to quickly recap, Rabbi Yaakov's basic yesod was that Yehuda was really, before Matan Torah, the way Yehuda performed Yivum was the correct way before Matan Torah, that eventually when Yehuda was Meyabim Tamar, that was supposed to be that way l'chatchila, that first the father gets the mitzvah of Yibum before Matan Torah, and I will call it the minhag before Matan Torah, and then if the father can't do it for one reason or another, then the eldest child does it. And if the eldest child dies, so the next in line does it. So Rabbi Yaakov builds on that so that, first he explains why it is so, because obviously the father lost this child, and therefore the father reproduces a child instead of that child, right?
In other words, Erva Onan were the first choice only because Yehuda was still married.
Correct. That's what Reb Yaakov says.
And he didn't want to marry a second wife.
Right. He didn't want to marry a second wife. And Reb Yaakov sort of proves that, because as soon as Bashua dies and he gets up from his mourning and goes up to Gzizas Atzon, which means he's ready to do Simcha, to be B'Simcha, because that's when they used to make a Simcha. We find that in Sefer Shmuel as well, when they did Gezizas Atzon. So at that point is when Tamar dresses up and seduces Yehuda, and not before that. So you see that she waited for the Bashua to die. So Rabbi Yaakov says, yeah, you see clear from the Parsha, why does it bring in that Bashua died? Who cares if she died or not? It's not relevant. He's allowed to marry two women. It's a little bit before Rabbeinu Gershon's time, right? So why have that? The answer is that that's where the others were knowing, right? And therefore, she waited till then, right?
Because otherwise, Tamar should have gone to him and said, Sheila is old enough. Let's do it.
Correct. That's what
she didn't do that.
Exactly, right? Anyway, so that's what Reb Yaakov says. And that's his yesod. And that he answers up a lot of different questions with that. We'll soon go into the piece. I sent a piece on Divrei Hayomim today, which we'll go into and see. I just want to finish on Shin Samach Tes, which was page 8 last time. I want to finish the last, because Reb Yaakov starts this whole piece off with Ruth, right? What's that whole end of Ruth? That it talks about the baby being part of being Nomi's child and not Ruth's child. Of course, the text doesn't deny that the child was biologically Ruth's child. It's saying just according to Yivum, it was Nomi's child, right? And that's the last paragraph on Shin Samach Tes. V'hinei berusu Boaz haya Yivum al pi midas chasidus l'fnim rishur sadin. That's what the Ramban already says in Bereshis, that you see that they had a minhag in biblical times, that even if you weren't the brother-in-law, you still did Yivum, and in this case it's Ki Boaz lo haya achiv shel Machlon ela ben Dod, he was a cousin. Ubechol ofen, k'fi shabir Ramban, aben anolad min hayavam kam al shem niftar. The minhag was that, in other words, this is not a halacha, but according to the minhag, you get the same din as the halacha, that the ben hanolad min hayivim kom al shema niftar. Skip the next two lines; we'll get to them a little later. V'lachein morim apsukim shaben hanolad hayakushu lenomi ki'ilu hu bena b'makam machlon, because she lost a machlon, right? So now the baby becomes hers instead of machlon. K'moshe amru v'hayel l'chol meishiv nefesh l'chal esh sevaseich v'tikach nomi es hayelad v'tishiseo b'cheiko v'tehi lo le'omenes v'tikra lo hashcheno shem leimor yulad ben lenomi. Right, Yulad ben Lenomi. So Rabbi Yaakov says, "What's going on here? It's not Yulad ben Lerus. What Lenomi? Where does Nomi come in?" The answer is, according to the minhag of Yivum, this was a ben of Nomi now. right? Just like Peretz was a ben of Yehuda, he's the new Bechor, so to speak, of Yehuda. She's also now this child. Ovad is the ben of Nomi. He says all working on that idea. Okay, now let's take a look at Divrei Hayamim, which I sent you today. Here, Reb Yaakov has something very interesting. I heard this from Reb Yaakov. I don't know if he ever. I have to check. I thought it's in the Ksav Yad. I didn't find it in the Ksav Yad, but Reb Yaakov Kamenetsky records it here. I remember Reb Yaakov telling us about it. He says like this. It's page Tov Nun Aleph in Divrei Hayamim, the beginning of Divrei Hayamim Aleph, chapter Bet. It says over there, B'nei Yehuda Erva Onan V'Shela Shlosha Nolad Lo Mibash Shua Haknanis V'Hi Bechor Yehuda Rabbeinu Hashem V'Miseu V'Tomar Kalosa Yolda Lo Esperetz. Right, Vezerach it says over there. Right, Esperetz Vezerach. I'm pretty sure it says in the pasuk. Tomar his Kala, his daughter-in-law Yolda Lo Esperetz. So Reb Yaakov says two different things on this pasuk. Pashtus pasuk shemiyachas is bashua knanis lezera knan. It doesn't say lebashua. It says bashua knanis. Don't forget, Ezra is writing this, right? And he's has in the back of his mind, he's doing the yichus of Yehuda. So he says shemiyachas bashua knanis lezera knan. Why does he do that? Hila hasbir shesiba me'es Hashem shalotetzi malchus based over mizera kanan. He's trying to be merames that everything in that text looks like in Sefer Bereshis in Parshas Vayeshev looks like that everything just happened the way it happened, right? And really, from Bashua should have come out Onan, and Shelah came out, right? And this should be the lineage of David, right? So Reb Yaakov says, "Shesiba meis Hashem shalotetze malchus based on mizera Canaan." Since he married a Canaanite woman, so HaKadosh Baruch Hu pulled strings that it should based of it shouldn't come from. Devarim Rambam Bereishis Lamed Ches Beis. Pasuk Madish Peretz Shorosh Malchus based of it Nolad LeYehuda Meisha Acheres Tamar. Okay. Okay, in other words, that according to Chazal, it's the Bito Shel Shem. But one thing for sure, it doesn't say she was a Canaanite woman, Tamar, right? Reb Yaakov uses the Medrash to say that she was actually from Shem and not from Chum. But even without that, it doesn't say anything in the text about Tamar being from Canaan. So Reb Yaakov says that's why it says in the text, "Noladu mi bashua Kananis," right? And then Vayi Bechor Yehuda Rabbeinu Hashem V'Miseu. By the way, over here it also doesn't say anything about. Reb Yaakov will talk about this soon. It doesn't say anything about Onan, just right? So now the next piece, right? So Reb Yaakov says here a chiddush that even though we normally would say that things worked out the way they worked out because of what the people did, but it worked out also that Mashiach would not be born from Canaan. The Malchus would not be born from Canaan. And Reb Yaakov says that's why the pasuk stresses Bashua Canaanis, that it didn't the child of Mashiach, the lineage of David and Mashiach didn't come from her. The Tamar Kalasi Yoldalos Peretz. Okay, in the next piece, the same pasuk, Hine Iskira Kosa Shebechor Yehuda Mace. Avlo Iskir Makara and Onan. It doesn't say what happened with Onan. It just says, right? Vahib Bechor Yehuda Rabbeinu Hashem V'Miseu. What happened to Onan? He's not here. Because the pasuk wants to, and here Reb Yaakov comes back to his yisod, that the pasuk wants to stress that Peretz is the Bechor in the place of Kamosha Biarti B'Sof Sefer Rus Barichas. That's the piece that we saw last week, right? Avalagabi Onan Einin Yilichtov Kan V'Lachenu Madgish pasuk Bechor Yehuda. It wants to show it's Bechor Yehuda, and Peretz came in the place of Er, and Onan has nothing to do with it. We want to know who the Bechor of Yehuda is, because we're talking about the lineage of Beis David in Sefer Divrei Hayom. Now he says something very interesting, Reb Yaakov. It says in the pasuk, "Gitomer kalosa yoldalo es Peretz." Okay, let me show you. According Reb Yaakov is going to point out that on Divrei Hayom we know it's not Rashi. I think we know who it is today, which Rishon he is. But one thing we know, it's not Rashi, because if it's Rashi, he quotes people who lived after him, which would be a very good trick, right? So it can't be Rashi. So he calls it V'ayin Kad B'Perish HaMayuchis L'Rashi Dir Maskov V'Tomer Kaloser Shekosav. He asks a bomb. In his mind, he's asking a bomb. This Rishon, he was definitely a Rishon, but he was a little bit after Rashi, from what I remember. Shekosav Tmiya Ani Ha'ech Maski Gnut Ziknato Shel David. I wonder, how does Ezra, who's writing about the yichus of David HaMelech, right, mention the Gnut of David HaMelech's his grandparents, right? What does he mean over here? Because it says Tomer Kaloso, right? So why it's a gnuz for Yehuda? He married his daughter-in-law. So why are you mentioning it here? It should just say the Tomer Yoldalo Peretz, right? Why Tomer Kaloso, right? So according to Reb Yaakov, this is not a Gnai. This is the Yesod, okay? There's no question. In other words, it says kaloso to tell me he's not mutter to his kala, he's not mutter to his daughter-in-law, except when it comes to Yivam. Just like someone's not mutter to their sister-in-law, except when it comes to Yivam. L'chei Peretz shenolad hu ha'bechor shel Yehuda hu b'makom Er, right? So that's why in the text here it mentions Er, bechoro, and then it says Peretz kalasa, right? The Tomer kalasa yoldalo Peretz, because they want to tell you it was b'makom Yivam. Else, how does Peretz become the bechor here? So it has to say Peretz kalaso. And this is a raya that the Kala was the right person that Yehuda was did Yivam to, right? He did it in a strange way because she seduced him, but it was Yivam, right? It worked out to be a Yivam at the end, right? So the point over here is that Reb Yaakov is answering up this question of what's interesting is that this Rishon understood. Had a question. He doesn't give an answer, by the way. He just remains a question. To me, right? He says, to me, Ani, Ha'ech maski gnusik noser shel David, that he mentioned Kaloso, right? So this is, according to Reb Yaakov, it answers it, but we have to add something here. According to Reb Yaakov, since this is the whole Yesod, right? This is the raya to Reb Yaakov, that it was Kaloso, because also it would be a gnus. If it's not through Yivam, it's a Gnus, right? So therefore, that this is what Reb Yaakov says over here. Now, I skipped over certain things, and you'll see today. I'm just going to read 3 different paragraphs that we skipped over, and you'll see they fit without. You don't have to force them. They work. They're built onto themselves. These 3 paragraphs. And we'll go back and I'll show it to you. Reb Yaakov says here a tremendous chiddush, and I'll tell you what I think about it, right? Reb Yaakov learns up a Gemara pasuk in Tanach here, al pi pshat, but he learns it up in sort of in a controversial way, okay? So I gave you 2 sheets today about Parshas Ki Teitzei, but you don't really need 2 sheets. It's the top of the second sheet, page 486 in the R Scroll edition, right? And everybody knows there's a parsha of Yivam, right? Al pi Torah, al pi mitzvos Torah that we have, okay? And in that parsha, it says like this: V'haya b'chor asher teleid yakum al shem achiv hameis. And the b'chor that she will give birth to, meaning the Yavama, that's what it sounds. I'm reading you what it sounds like. V'haya b'chor, and the b'chor that she will give birth to will be established on the name of the dead brother. Okay? Okay? Now, that what I just translated, the Gemara says is wrong. Okay? And if you look in Rashi, Rashi doesn't even bother giving you the pshuto. Okay? Rashi over there in at the in the Parshas Ki Teitze, right? Over here, Rashi says, Rashi quotes the Gemara in Yevamos, and he says like this. Here. V'haya b'chor asher teleid, gadol ha'achim hu miyabein. Ota. Gadol ha'achim hu miyabein ota. The oldest of the children, he does the evil. V'haya b'chor is not going on the child. It's going on the miyabein, according to the Gemara. Asher teleid, which she now teleid doesn't fit exactly so well, because it should be if a haya b'chor is going on the fellow doing the yivam, right? The b'chor is going on the fellow doing the yivam, because it learned from over here that yivam is done with the oldest child, right? In the family, right? So it shouldn't say Asher Telei, that she gave birth. It should say Asher Yolda. But the Gemara uses this, Asher Telei, Prat La'Ilanis. She has to be a woman that can give birth. She'ena Yoledis. An Islanis can't give birth, right? She doesn't have the physical, biological ability to give birth. So Telei, Yakum al Shemochav, Ze Sheyibam et Ishto, Yito Nachlas Hameis Minichsei Oviv. The one who was miyabin the wife of his brother, Yitel Nachlas Hameis b'nichsei oviv, right? He will take the nachal of the mace as well. Okay, that's the way the Gemara learns it. Now, I just wanted to give you a little bit of background. Let's go now to Reb Yaakov. The Gemara there says something very interesting and a little bit strange. I asked Reb Yaakov Kamenetsky if this type of Gemara appears anywhere else in Shas, because I can't really testify that, but he can. He said, no, it doesn't. And I'll soon see what I mean. So in page Shin Samach Vav, go back to Shin Samach Vav, which is number 5 in what I gave you last week. It says like this. Venira what?
Shin Samach Vav?
Shin Samach Vav at the end of the page, right? Which we skipped. Okay? And now you're going to see it's a shtickle Torah onto itself. Okay? Venira Lomar. Dehine legabi aposik beparshas Yivum. V'hoya b'chor asher teleid yukum al shem ochav hameis. Amru Chazal. This is the Chazal he quotes. Okay? Afal gav de b'chol Torah kula. A mikra yotzi midei pshuto. Hacha asoy gzereshava apikte mi pashte legamri. Rava says it's strange. The Gemara simply takes this whole thing out of its pashtus, right? And there's no pshuta shel mikra here. Okay? Sometimes you learn halachas from the pshuta shel mikra, and then you learn from the drash as well. Here, there's nothing you learn halachas. They took it out, and you only learn from the gzereshava. The hainu. Mikorach Gzeira Shava. And Reb Yaakov has to put in, right? Feels a little bit guilty. So he puts in Korach Gzeira Shava. Shekabalasa Misinai. Gzeira Shava, the Gemara says from Sinai. Nidrash Kol HaPasik L'Kama Drashas. V'haya B'chor. Mitzvah al Godel Ha'achim Liyabe. Okay? Pashup shot in the pasuk is v'haya b'char sher telei, and the b'char which she'll give birth to, right? The Yavama, right? That will be called on the name of his brother, the mace, right? The Gemara says v'haya b'char mitzvah. The b'char is not going on the child; it's going on the miyabe. Mitzvah lagodlach and miyabe. Asher telei prat la'aylinis. Rashi quotes this, right? Rashi doesn't quote anything kipshuto. Shayavam etzricha lios bat bonim ruya laledes. Yakum Hashem achiv benachala. Shayavam yoresh nichsei hameis. The yavam is yoresh nichsei hameis. Vilu pshuto shel mikra batul legamri. The pashut way you could learn this is batul legamri. Ulechora hakeitzat shelafi pshuto shel mikra nemar shanoled mimaisa yivim. How is it possible that according to the Pashup shot, Nemar Shanoled Mimaisa Yivim, that Vahaya, right? Vahaya, what does it say over there? Vahaya Bechor Shanolad, right? Vahaya Bechor Shanolad Yakum al Shem Achiv Hameis, right? So Reb Yaakov says, how is it possible? Shuta Shalmerka Nemar Shanoled Mimaisa Yivim Kom Makom Nifter, which that was the yesod of Reb Yaakov, that the child that's born, right, it goes in the place of the nifter. So why did the Torah write it that way if you can't learn anything from it, right? So Reb Yaakov's going to say a tremendous chiddush here, okay?
I just want to understand. I just want to understand. So he's saying that whenever there's a drush of Chazal, it still has to leave Pshuto Shemikra. And he's saying here, the drasha works, but there's no Pshuto Shemikra, which is left.
Right. In other words, Rav already says that, right? Because Rav says, Hacha asig zereshava apikta mi pashte legamri. Right? Normally, ein mikra yotzei Pshuto, Rav says. This is mamash the Gemara in Yavamas. But here, the gzera apikta mi pashte legamri. Right, which sounds like we don't look at the pashtus at all. And that's why I think Rashi didn't even quote the pashtus. He didn't say aval, pshat, this or something like that. He just brought you the Chazal without even saying it's Chazal. He just brings you according to Chazal how you read the pasuk. So Reb Yaakov says, is it possible that they wrote it this way and they don't mean for you to learn it this way? And there's sort of no reason for why they wrote it. The Pashup shot, they should have written it according to the Gzeir Shava. What's going on over here? So Reb Yaakov wants to say a tremendous chiddush here. Okay, so let's first read the chiddush, right? That's on this page, the second place we skipped. Okay, on the left column, right? After you have the underline Haniftar, does everybody see that on page 6? Shin Samach Zayin, right? It says Venira Haniftar. That's why I underlined you should skip. And you'll see this fits right in as if there was nothing in between. Venira. Shalakach lechuven pshute shal mikra b'posik v'haya ben ha'bachor shetelin yokum al shem ochin. Lemitzvas yibun shayenoeges lefnei matan Torah. Shaben arishin shenolad me'yibum shal tamar shal tamar al idei Yehuda hu yokum al shem ochiv hameis the hainu aben hanosif shall lead Yehuda yokum al shem ochiv hagadol yoser hameis. So Reb Yaakov says that it seems to me that the pshute shel mikra over here in Vahaya ben Habachor is referring to the story of Yehuda, right? Lemitzvas yibum shahaisa nohegis lefnei matan Torah. That's the pshute shel mikra. Shaben Arishon, the first child, shnol meiv shel tamar al idei Yehuda, hu yokum al shem ochiv hameis Dainu aben hanosef shaholid Yehuda yokum al shem ochiv hagadol yoser hameis. Right. So if you look at the pashtus of the mikra, it sounds like what Yehuda did, right? Because what does it say in the pasuk? It says in the pasuk, "V'haya b'chor asher telei," the b'chor which she gives birth to, yokim al shem ochiv hameis, right? He will establish on the name of the brother that died, the Bechor will be established on the name of the brother that died. That's exactly the Yibum of Yehuda, right? That Bechor becomes now the Bechor of the person who died, right? That becomes the child of the person who died, right? So Reb Yaakov says that's what the Torah is being meramis to here. And why is the Torah being meramis to it here, right? Reb Yaakov doesn't say. But Reb Yosef Kamenetsky here has an unbelievable piece that he actually told to Reb Yaakov, okay? In 25, on page Shin Samach Zayin, right, that we're reading now, in 25, you got to hear this piece. I hold it's Ga'inus. It's probably nothing less than Ga'inus, okay? And soon I'll explain to you why the pasuk would say that. Okay.
Are we in the text or the? Excuse me. Are we in the text or in the hara?
Ha'ara. Okay.
Which one?
25.
Okay.
Okay. It's a little bit of a long piece, but every word is worth it. Zechel Dover, Pasik Vaya Bechor Shetela Yokem Al Shem Achav Ames Koyal Mitzvos Yivim Shel Ufnei Matan Torah Ubofen Miyuchad Al Yivim Shenasa Im Tamar. Right, it's going not on Yivim for Matan Torah, but it's going on the Yivim of Tamar. Yeshlom So B'Tevas Bechor. You can find in the word Bechor Vaya Bechor Asher Telei. The whole shtickle Torah is in the word Bechor. Why? This is certain, he says, that according to the Pshuta Shel Mikra, it's certain that the child that was born is called a Bechor with regard to the person that died. Belizera, he didn't have children, so this is Bechor. He's like the Bechor. ויש להם כבר ילודים מנישואים קודמים, ואין שם עניין לגבם שהוא ייקרא בכור. Regarding the Yavam and Yavama, right? They could have been married before. Okay? The fellow, the Yavam could have another 2 wives before this. And he has a Bechor already. Okay? And the Yavama could also have been married and have kids. But now she married this guy, she became an almana. And then she married this guy, didn't have kids from him. So she's a Yavam also. That's the halacha. It's not a woman that doesn't have kids, period. She doesn't have kids from him, right? So it could be that both of them have a Bechor already. So what does it mean? V'haya ben ha-Bechor. Yosef is asking. Elodakati eina miyushav haloshem Bechor lefi pshuta shel mikra. Ki chutz me'aben hazeh shenolad min ha-Yavam Shara banim sheyivoldu liyavim uliyavama ain't shayachim klal and nifter. V'reim yuchasim ach v'rak liyavim liyavama. The second child that's born from this Yavan and Yavama, is he shayach to the first father? Is he shayach to the brother? No, right? The first child is to the brother. The rest is to the new married couple, right? The Yavam and Yavama, right? So what do you mean? Why is he called the Ben HaBechor? There's not going to be anyone after him. Why are you calling him Ben HaBechor? When you say V'hoya, right? The text is V'hoya Bechor, which is mashma. There's a child after this. There's no child after this, right? So why are you calling him Bechor? Rabbi Yosef says, right? Ha'ofen ha'yochid sheyochel lios lo shem Bechor. When can you have a name of Bechor? In only one case. You know what the case is? Hu kishenolad mimaisa yivim talmim. When you give birth to talmim, both those kids are shaykh to the Yavam and Yavama. They're shaykh to the first brother. They're born at the same time. Okay? Kigon peretz v'zerach. Shom yesh nafkamina kishanolad Harishon habachar who zeshakam al shem ames, right? When you have twins out of that first yivum, right? You have to know who the bachar is because he's the guy in place of the original brother, and the second fellow is not anymore in place of that. V'lo ha'poshin Nimtzu shapasik shenokad lishna de bechor achein arba ma'isi yivim shel lefnei matan Torah shel yudu tamar. The fact that it says v'haya haben habechor and it doesn't say it says v'haya habechor, it doesn't say v'haya haben asher teled, right? Means that it's talking about a case where you have to find a bechor, right? There's only one case like that, the case of Yud and Tamar. That's the only case. So Reb Yaakov Kamenetsky says, in this parsha, you see clearly that the Torah, according to the Pshuto Shel Mikra, right, is referring to the case of Yivim from a father-in-law, right, and Yivim of Yehuda and Tamar. That's what he says over here. Nimtza shapasik shenaka lisha de bechor achein arba ma'isa yivim shel lefnei matan Torah shel Tamar sheperetz habechor nikra al shem Er v'unasel bechor Yehuda. He became the bechor of Yehuda, right? Now this is a little bit crazy that Reb Yaakov is saying that this parsha in the Torah, which is dealing with the halachas and mitzvah of Yibum, in its pshuta is referring to that first story in Sefer Bereshis, right? So what Reb Yaakov is saying over here is a little bit of a go in this also, because he's saying like this. Normally, Pshutei Shel Mikra means that we learn something from Pshutei Shel Mikra, but Rava said, here you don't learn anything from Pshutei Shel Mikra. So if you don't learn anything, so what is Reb Yaakov? So what's the Pshutei Shel Mikra? He says the Pshutei Shel Mikra is the story of Bereshis, right? That you don't learn anything from. You don't learn anything halachically. That has to do with Ma'aser Bereshis. So why do you have it? Why did Pshutei to tell you that the Torah hiskim al yado shel Yehuda? Since the pashtus over here, the Pshutei Shel Mikra is Yehuda and Tamar, the story of Yehuda and Tamar. So you see that what Yehuda and Tamar did, the Torah over here is machap, and Torah over here says that was the way it should be before Matan Torah. So that's the reason why over here, Rav is right. You don't learn anything new, but you do learn something about the history of what happened in Yevama before Matan Torah. And you need to have that because you need to know that the Torah was maskim to what Yehuda did, right? In other words, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, a lot of times, Yoshua, for instance, he gave a klola to anyone who builds Yericho. And the Gemara says, Hiskam HaKadosh Baruch Hu al yado. God was maskim to what he did, right? In other words, there are certain places, the Gemara says, actually, I think in Psachim, that certain people did things. Hiskam HaKadosh Baruch Hu al yado, right? God was maskim. Here, that's what it's giving you. It's giving you here, giving Yehuda haskama to what he actually did, and that's the traditional.
So why does the Torah have Yehuda being like embarrassed like that, and it's called out as like it seems like it is a bad thing, and yet you're
so we understand it as a bad thing. That's why the Meyuchas L'Rashi said, "How could you call a kala so?" Right? But Ezra wasn't smart enough. Right. It was a slip of the pen. So that's what Reb Yaakov is saying. We make a mistake on how we learn the parsha. The embarrassing thing for Yehuda was that he didn't marry her. That's the bad. Satka mimeni kalkelo natatia l'shela b'ni. Right? He was embarrassed about that because he was supposed to go and marry her. Right? So that's what he said. He said she was right for good because I was slow on the uptake. So, of course, but that's the embarrassment. It's not embarrassing that he slept with Tamar wrongly, right? He winds up sleeping with his daughter-in-law, right? That's even worse than a Zona, right? He's wound up sleeping with his daughter. Right. That's nothing wrong with that. That's what he was supposed to do, because that's what he says, "Some to be many," right? Otherwise, he would say to her, "Why are you coming to sleep with me, Tamar? Are you crazy? I'm listening to you."
Right.
Two questions.
Yeah, sure.
The Torah says that she saw that Yehuda was not giving her shla. Okay.
Right.
Not that it doesn't say the Torah that she saw that she wasn't getting married to Yehuda. She said wasn't. Okay, that's number one. And number two, after Matan Torah, the parents would have been called the Bechor of Er and not the Bechor of Yehuda.
After Matan Torah.
Mm-hmm.
What do you mean by after Matan Torah? I mean, like he's called the Bechor of Yehuda instead of Er, correct? That's what happens in Sefer Bereshis, right? That's what Reb Yaakov says. He's called the Bechor of Yehuda instead of Er. He becomes the Bechor of Yehuda, even though Shelah is older than him, and Onan was older than him, right? But he becomes the Bechor of Yehuda instead of Er. That's exactly what happens.
But let's say Er was still alive and Tamar had married Onan, okay,
right?
Whoever, then
right.
Yehuda already has a Bechor.
Er would be the Bechor.
Right, Er will be the Bechor, but even so, Er or Shelah has to do Yavama with Tamar because Onan died. Okay, so she gives birth to Peretz. Peretz is the Bechor of whom?
Well, if you have a Bechor, right? So Peretz would not be a Bechor anymore, right? You mean if Yehuda did it? If Yehuda would do it, right? Mm-hmm. If Yehuda does it instead of Onan, right? In other words, because Onan died, right?
Right.
So he doesn't become now the Bechor of Yehuda. He becomes the child of Yehuda who Onan was. Right? He becomes that child. He becomes the second child of Yehuda.
Uh-huh.
And if there's a nafkamina, I'll give you the nafkamina. If Er then dies, right? Then this child goes before Shelah. In other words, with all the inheritance and everything, he goes before Shelah. In other words, he gets the brachas, he gets the malchus.
Right.
That's the way Reb Yaakov would understand. What was the first question, but?
The first question was how come Tamar says she saw that Yehuda was not giving her shlah?
Okay, so what happened was, if you remember, it says why Yehuda didn't give her Shelah, right? It says, right? Yehuda said to her, wait till Shelah grows up. And then the Torah tells you what he's thinking. He says maybe he'll also die. Who knows, right? That's what he's thinking. He doesn't say it to her, but Torah tells you what he's thinking. But what he says is you have to wait for Shelah to grow up. Obviously, Shelah was a katan, right? So he says you have to wait for him to grow up, right? Now, that's all we see is that, that he said wait for him to grow up, but he never really had an intention, but he didn't know what to do. Because he can't marry her because he has a wife, right? He doesn't want Shelah to marry her. So Tamar is sitting there as a Yavama and can't do anything, right? But as soon as Yehuda's wife passes away, right? So Tamar says, look, he didn't give me Shelah, and now his wife passed away. The real Yavama, the real Yavam is Yehuda. In other words, they had that as a Kabbalah, a minhag, but the real one's Yehuda. So I'm not going to go to Shelah and seduce Shelah. I could seduce Shelah, right? It could be I could seduce Shelah, right? But I'm not going to do that. If I seduce her, I seduce Yehuda because he's the one that's l'chatchila supposed to do the Yivam on me. So that's why she goes there. When the question came up about Shelah, Yehuda was married still, right? So it says he didn't give to Shelah. And when it says, I mentioned that last time, you don't learn al kelo natati l'Shelah b'ni. Therefore, I didn't give it a Shelah b'ni. That can't mean the pshuto, because that's not the reason he didn't give it a Shelah b'ni, because he's supposed to do it. It says why, right? It means because I didn't give her a Shelah b'ni. I didn't give her, so therefore she was sitting around. I kept putting it off. And when my wife died, so of course she decided she has to do the Yivam and do it in the proper way. That's before Matan Torah. So that's what she did. Okay. So Reb Yaakov says this very interesting chiddush. Reb Yaakov Kamenetsky really explains it very well, and what it's really saying is, and I don't think there's anywhere else in the Torah like this. In other words, there's nowhere in the Torah that there's a parsha in the mitzvahs of the Torah already that Al Pi Pshuto is referring back to Ma'aseh Bereshis, right? I don't think you have anything like that, because let's say if you have Avram Avinu received Mila, right? But God told him to do Mila, correct? So you don't need a parsha that a Kosh was maskim al yodo later on that God told him to do the Mila. He told him how to do the Mila and everything. Here, God doesn't tell Yehuda to do the Yivam. This is a minhag that they had to do it like this, right? So that, how do I know that that's what God really wanted? I know it because Rabbi Yaakov would say, because the Pshuto Shel Mikra is that story, right? So on the one hand, we don't learn anything new from the Pshuto Shel Mikra. That's what Rava says. But on the other hand, you do see that the Torah gave haskama to what Yehuda did. And that's the Pshuto Shel Mikra there, that you don't paskin because after Matan Torah, of course, a father is not allowed to do yivum on a child, on a daughter-in-law. It's usher to do yivum, right?
It's a good
Now,
argument against the biblical critics.
Well, what?
The good evidence against the biblical critics.
Because
here you have a piece in Sefer Devarim that only makes sense in the context of.
I hear, yeah, good, yes, you're right, 100%. Okay, but that's what he says over here. Now, I told you last week that there was two things that Reb Yaakov said about the parsha of Peretz and Zerach and Yehuda and Tamar. One was that I told you about Mashiach, right? That the Medrash, and Reb Yaakov accepts that Medrash as the reason why Yehuda is put between the two stories of Yosef being sold and Yosef being in Mitzrayim. The Medrash says that it sounds like from the Medrash, everyone is involved in their daily affairs, right? And I think Michael wrote this. He wrote up the piece very nicely. I have to tell you, give a yashikok to Michael. He wrote it up very nicely. And Rabbi Yaakov said on that Medrash, it says, Yaakov was Osik Betaniso, Sako Betaniso, and Reuven was Osik, Yehuda was Osik in getting married, and Yosef was Besakito, Besako Betaniso, right? So, and Vakadosh Baruch Hu, Haya Osik Bibro Oro Shel Mashiach, right? He was involved in Mashiach, right? So Reb Yaakov deduced from there, this is independent of anything from that Medrash, right? That Mashiach's going to come when nobody's working on him. In other words, no one's looking for him, right? People are involved in the daily affairs, doing what they need to do, al pi Torah, al pi the daily affairs, and all of a sudden Mashiach's going to show up. That's what he said. You learn from that Medrash. And I mentioned what? That's the Gemara in Sanhedrin. David's quoting, right? Shlosha Gimel Ba Hesachadas, right? One of the things is Mitzia, one is an Akrav, and one of them is Oro Shel Mashiach, or Mashiach, it says, I think, over there, right? That Mashiach comes Hesachadas. You see from this Medrash exactly that, right? That Gemara is mamish this Medrash, except the difference is the Medrash shows it from the text here, right? The Medrash is showing that God is creating the Oro Shel Mashiach, and you see it in the text that, that's all happening. Everyone's involved in their daily affairs. From the Gemara there, you just have to deduce this. Right here, it's open clearly, because the Gemara just says, it comes Besach Hadas. Okay, where do you see that Mashiach comes Besach Hadas? So you would say to me, well, he hasn't come yet. So you can't see it. No, you can see it, Reb Yaakov would say. You see that the Oro Shel Mashiach was created already Besach Hadas, and therefore now Mashiach is going to come Besach Hadas. That's what Reb Yaakov was saying. There's a second thing that Reb Yaakov says, right, about Peretz and Zerach. Okay, these things I heard about Peh for Reb Yaakov, and I found it in Chumash. And I sent it to Stu right before 8:30. I don't know if you saw it, Stu.
Yeah, and I sent it to the WhatsApp.
To the link. Okay. I didn't know where it was.
I called it document 2.
Document 2. So I want to show you what Reb Yaakov says about Peretz and Zerach. A second idea that has to do with it's not just the idea of Mashiach. Oh, it's the whole unfolding of Mashiach. Okay, he says like this. That's page Reish Lamed Ches in the new edition of Chumash, but it appears in the old edition as well. It's the end of a long piece that the author on Chumash recorded, just like Rabbi Yosef recorded his piece in Sefer Ruth. He recorded the piece the similar piece. He has things that Rabbi Yosef has. Rabbi Yosef has things that he doesn't have. Okay, because they're basing it on two different recordings. Okay, Habilbul v'achose behirut shemishakefet lanu haTorah being seder leidosim shel peretz v'zerach. He says there's a bilbul here. There's a mivulbal means a confusion. V'achose behirut. It's something's not clear in this story of peretz and zerach. In other words, the way they're born is really strange. Because why, God could have had it come out that Peretz is born first. What are we doing this whole tap dance for? So one could say that, well, they wanted to tell you how important it was to put the red string around the Bechar. So they wanted to, if you bring it out this way, you really get the message, right? But Reb Yaakov says something else over here. Habilba chosa behirusha mishakefes haTorah being seder leidosim shel peretz zerach nichtav kedei lamdeinu ech yishtal shlo ma'oros benogei lebiyoso asofit shel Mashiach ben David. It's to tell me how the unfolding of the events are going to happen at the end for Mashiach ben David. Ukamo shanu rom be'einenu kayom, and like we see today, mikodem tovo azricha. First, it'll come, Zerach will come, right? What happens? Zerach comes out. His hand comes out first, right? Or Chodesh Yizrach al Shmei Olam HaYehudi. There's going to be something new coming out. There's going to be like someone that seems like Mashiach. This is the Orosh Mashiach, right? This is what we call Hatchalta de Gula. Right? Natchal tegula. Avol pitom tatchil tkufa chadasha. Vayi kameshav yodo v'hine yotza achiv. Right? Klomar. Ba'od kol einayim v'alavavos nesuas lezricha hachadasha b'chol shvad she misham tavo Yeshua yifrotz HaMashiach amiti mimokam acher v'yiskala orosh HaMashiach. Okay? In other words, the idea of having Zerach come out first is to teach us that that's the way the world is going to be. That Zerach is going to come out with his hand. So there's something there of Mashiach. There's a hand of Mashiach, and it's then going to pull back. That's the Zerach, the new era. And then from a whole different angle, Peretz is going to show up. Because why does he Peretz? Right? Reb Yaakov says because Melech Poretz Geder La Soslo Derech. Right? He's called Peretz because a melech is that was the raya that Mashiach is going to come from him, because a malchus is going to come from him because of just the way he was born. Right? From the way he was born, that Zerach came out first, but he didn't. Only his hand came out, and then Peretz pushed forward. That's telling me that's malchus because melech Poretz Geder. Right? So that's telling us that's malchus. So Reb Yaakov here says, right, that it tells us that Yifrotz HaMashiach Hamiti Mokam Acher V'Yizkala Or Shel Mashiach. So not only, according to Reb Yaakov, we won't be ready for Mashiach, we're going to look in the wrong place. It's not going to be the wrong place in the sense that it's nothing, right? It's going to be, there's something there, but it's not the right thing. It's going to come from a completely different angle, which we are not going to be looking towards, right? We're going to be looking somewhere else for it, because we see that other place looks like the Ora Mashiach, because that's why it's called Zerach, Zricha. Zricha means the beginning of the shining, right? Zricha Tashemesh, right? And there is a Zricha there. But don't think Mashiach is going to come from there. It's going to come from a whole different place. That's what Reb Yaakov here is saying. And then he says, V'lazeh kivnu chazal b'ma'amor nanel, שבשעה שכל אחד עוסק בעסקיו, זה בסקו, וזה בתניסו, וזה בבניין משפחה, הקדוש ברוך הוא יש בו ראש המשה. So he comes back to that medrash. Now, I didn't give you the next page, which maybe I should have given you the next page. There, Reb Yaakov says that, and that's what the Rambam means, we don't know how it's going to be until it's going to be. The Rambam, right at the end of Hilchos Melachim, says, but we don't know how it's going to be till it's going to be. So Reb Yaakov says, where does the Rambam get that from? How does the Rambam know? It's not going to. We don't know how it's going to be till it's going to be. So the Reb Yaakov says he gets it from the story of Peretz and Zerach. He gets it from that story because we didn't know how it's going to be till it's going to be. We thought it's going to come from one person, came from a different person. Right?
What does he mean? We see in our days.
What?
What's the zricha? It looks like the zricha has already happened. He says we see in our days.
Right.
What's
right.
our days?
In other words, he's working with the idea that there's something big happening. We call it Hatchalta de Gula, right? But a lot of times, the believers of Hatchalta de Gula believe that they know how the Gula is supposed to come.
He's talking about Israel.
It sounds like to me. Now, again, I didn't hear. Reb Yaakov didn't write this. It's the author here writing it. So he either heard it from a tape, or he's taking liberty here. When I heard it from Reb Yaakov, he didn't say this. He didn't say anything about today. So I don't know. And I told you the author on Chumash tends to take a lot of leeway, a little bit more than I'd like. Right?
Who is the author?
The author is his name is 1 second. He was a Rav in Detroit. He retired now. Daniel Reb Daniel Neustadt. Yeah, correct. Neustadt. Right.
Wait a second. This Amud Reish Lamed Chet. This is taken from the new edition of on what pasuk is this going on?
It's going on the pasuk about Yehuda and Tamar.
And this is not in the first edition?
It is. The whole thing's in the first edition. I just took it out of the last edition, but the whole thing is right there.
And this fellow had all the tapes.
And if you read through that parsha now that he wrote over there, you'll see certain things that Reb Yosef didn't include. Why? Because the recording Reb Yosef heard was a different recording than he heard. And each time Reb Yaakov spoke about something, for some reason, he didn't say the same thing. This is known with Reb Yaakov. He could talk about the same Dvar Torah and he would add something, subtract something, another raya, a new idea. He would talk, because on the spot he thought of some new things and he would just say them. So he heard it from one recording, and I happen to have heard this whole thing from Reb Yaakov. Okay, so I know that Reb Yaakov said the two things about Mashiach as well, but I don't remember Reb Yaakov saying when he spoke to me about it that the Zrich of Zerach is here already, but I just remember Reb Yaakov saying everyone's going to look towards this person being Mashiach, and in fact, that's when he said this idea. He said the idea that each person looks for Mashiach in what he thinks Mashiach is supposed to look like, right? Like the Satmar are going to say he's going to be a Satmar, he's going to wear a Strymol and a Gartel, right? And he'll be an anti-Zionist, right? And the Belzer are saying you can be a Belzer, and the Litvaks are saying, what are you talking about? He's not going to even have payas. He's gonna have a nice clean shaven beard, and he's not, each person is like saying, and of course the Mizrahi movement is going to say that he's going to definitely have a kippah shruga. It'll be a big kippah shruga, but it'll be a kippah shruga, not a black kippah, right? So Reb Yaakov used to say on the Gemara says like this, right? Ma Shem Shel Mashiach, right? Amar Reb Menachem Shmo, right? Amar Reb Shilo Shmo. Amar Reb Yonun Shmo. Amar Reb Chanina Shmo. Right? So it's a really strange thing. Rabbi Yaakov says here you see that each Amora thought Mashiach is going to be like they think after them. Rashi says, Kol echad dorish acher shmo. That's what Rashi says, right? The Abarbanel says the name of the Rashba that the letters equal Mashiach, right? Amar Reb Menachem, Mem. Amar Reb Shilo, Shin. Amar Reb Yonan, Yud. Amar Reb Chanina, Chet. Right? That's the Abarbanel says in the name of the Rashba, right? But Reb Yaakov didn't tell me that. That I saw in the Abarbanel, right? But Reb Yaakov says, you see that each person starts thinking that it's coming from who I think Mashiach is. But that's what Reb Yaakov says. Everyone's going to be very surprised because it's going to come from a different angle completely, and you're going to really wonder, like, that's Mashiach, right? So that's what Reb Yaakov says. That's what Reb Yaakov.
Oh,
That's what he
Yeah,
said.
how did this fellow from Detroit again come to write these?
So he's a grandson-in-law. Okay. Now, when his father-in-law was the youngest son, right? When his father was the youngest son, when Reb Yaakov got sick, that son took Reb Yaakov's writings, and he took it in order that it should make sure it should be recorded, and he recorded it in the computer. He typed everything of Reb Yaakov's writings in a computer. So he had the possession of that. So he had that, and then he went to hear some people told him over Divrei Torah in the name of Reb Yaakov. So eventually he produced this sefer, right? And the last one he produced, which is recently, he added some more things. And I told you, he added things that Rabbi Yosef already wrote in the Tanach. He put them in Chumash because they were shaykh to the Chumash, right? So you'll get different things. You know, it's not going to be crazy, but you'll get different. Question?
Why does it assume that I mean, it's the same guy in Zerach. He comes out first, and he comes back, goes back in, and he comes out again. Why is it assumed to be a false start? Why can't it just be like we thought he was a Mashiach, and then something happened that he wasn't a Mashiach, and then in the end he was the Mashiach? Why does we have to be a false start like we're
well, because Peretz Lamaisa came out first, so right. It goes with the Peretz.
He came out. Oh, I see. So the false start is referring to Peretz, not to
exactly. The Peretz Poratz Geder, right? He came out first, even though the other guy had his arm out already.
So then how does Yaakov interpret the hand coming out?
How does Rabbi Yaakov interpret the hand? So yes. That's what this fellow said over here. I never asked Rabbi Yaakov, but he says, Mikodem tavo azricha zerach, or chodesh yizrach al shmei olam hayehudi. That's the zricha coming out, right? It is going to be some sort of hatchalta de geula, but it's not. That doesn't mean you're going to know how it's going to unfold the rest of the geula. There's going to be a zerach, right? But you're not going to know how it's going to unfold. You know that you'll think you know, but you won't. That's the way Reb Yaakov learned the idea of Mashiach, and that's what the Rambam means. Reb Yaakov claimed when he says we don't know how it's going to be till it's going to be. So don't bother guessing. Okay, guys, we'll stop here.
Great.
See you next week. Ezrat Hashem.